Hey y'all. So today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite sets in ADVOU, Pursuit Tyranitar. I believe this is the second strongest Tyranitar set, the first strongest being the Dragon Dance variants. You can call those one set. Um, but when I was learning the game, and for other people who maybe are learning the game, it wasn't exactly obvious to me why Pursuit Tyranitar was so powerful. I mean, you got your Dragon Dance Tyranitar that could sweep a team after one boost or two boosts, sweep a lot of teams. Um, And your other physical Tyranitars, they do really obvious breaking work, pressuring Blissey, pressuring Swampert, these sorts of things. But Pursuit Tyranitar was a bit more of a mystery to me. I saw it as a Gengar one trick, kills Gengar and does nothing else. And then that frees you up to use like Breloom, Heracross, Forretress, these types of Pokemon that are also, like physical Tyranitar, very powerful in their own right. But this isn't the whole story. And after playing ADV for 2 years, I have quite a different view on physical Tyranitar. I see it as extremely versatile. Far from being a Gengar trapper and nothing else, I see it as able to trap and pressure a variety of common Pokemon. And furthermore, I don't see it as a support Pokemon necessarily. I see it as a powerful offensive threat in its own right, even if there's no teammate that it's enabling. So in this presentation, I'm kind of going to go over the applications for Suittar and how I think about it in the builder, and how I how I use Suittar now in ways that I wasn't aware of when I was starting the game. And hopefully, for those of you who are picking up the tier, who are picking up ADV, new to ADV, this can inspire you to understand Suittar better and can inspire you to use it on your own builds. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing that Sutar is really good at is spike enforcement. I'm talking about when you already have spikes down, you already spiked with your Skarmory or your Fortress or whatever, and you're trying to keep them up, and you're trying to stop rapid spins, and you're trying to wear down the rapid spinners. Well, the two most common rapid spinners, Defensive Starmie and Claydol, are both psychic types, meaning they're weak to dark. They can't really switch in safely to Sutar and its powerful crunch. Hits both super effectively. And they can't even necessarily switch out of Suitar successfully and safely because Pursuit is just that hard hitting. Um, and it can, easily do over 50 to both of these, potentially putting them on the back foot and meaning that another teammate of Suitar can finish them off, or if they're already damaged, Suitar itself gets the kill. Even though Daphne and Claydol both have stab moves that hit Tyranitar super effectively, neither can one-shot Suitar. And Suitar, I'm talking about, of course, 252 HP Suitar here with no other defensive investment. Potentially you can get even bulkier and live their hits. Um, so this provides a really powerful win condition against slower, bulkier teams that are relying on a spinner to win the Spikes War. Something like V5 or maybe a slow like Claydol TSS, these types of teams are going to crumble if you kill their spinner and you get 3 layers up. And Suitar can allow you to kill that spinner. So in like say a matchup against like a slower melodic build, Suitar can be the threat that wins you the game. These teams cannot rush you down; they can't move very quickly. So you get those 3 spikes, you kill their spinner, or you do heavy damage to their spinner, and suddenly they can't keep up with the pressure that you're putting on them with your, actual offensive threats in your 3 layers. So yeah, I see it as a very strong punisher to those types of styles, but it's not necessarily consistent right out of the box, right? It can't be a standalone game plan. But there's some techs you can use to make it more consistent. So for beating Claydol, one option you have is for putting on more speed onto it. Most Claydolls sit at 188. There's some at 244. There's some at higher. But most Claydol are 188. So if you creep to like low 190s or maybe even the 200s, you'll be faster than most Claydol and you'll be able to two-shot them and you'll be able to outspeed them. Now, most of the time, Claydol and Starmie aren't going to be switching out of Suitar. That is because Suitar can run any 2 moves in its last slots, right? It has always Crunch and Pursuit, but it has 2 other slots with which to hit things with. Um, Given the fact that there is no dark resists in ADV, and well, there's a few dark resists. There's not that many dark resists. There's certainly not dark resists that can keep up with all of Tyranitar's options. It learns damaging move every type after all. Um, they probably aren't going to have a good switch in to your crunch. And given that, they're probably keeping in their Def Me or their Claydol to try and 1v1 your Suittar rather than, switch out to a Blissey where you might just crunch it down and then focus punch it or brick break it or something like that. You always run a fire move, almost always on Suittar, so Skarmory is not going to be safe switch in. Same with their own Tyranitar. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is Claydol, you creep your speed, you click crunch, and you're outspeeding the Claydol, and suddenly that means that the Claydol is dead and your Suittar survives, or you can even Pursuit the second time, really make sure the Claydol is doomed, and put it to maybe 20% if they stay in an EQ. Another alternative technique you can use for trapping Claydol is you can run Counter. Now, Counter is mostly useful for its non-Claydol um, winning abilities. Stuff like Metagross, if you invest in defense, can be countered. Stuff like Dragon Dance, Salamence can be countered. Um, and similarly, for a lot of threats, enemy Tyranitar are countered. But Claydol is just one of many things that you can counter, and it one-shots Claydol. If they stay in an Earthquake as you counter, they think you're pursuing, so they stay in an Earthquake. You can just remove Claydol completely, and that's a huge benefit for um, Suittar's teammates. You can pair, by the way, if you're going for Suittar as a Claydol remover, you can pair it with specially defensive Zapdos. Um, this is a set that gets walled by Claydol. It basically requires spikes, especially defensive Zapdos, but it kind of lets Claydol in, and at best you're toxicking it. More likely or also commonly you're just the Sleep Talk set, and in situations like those, having Claydol doomed, taken care of, and getting those spikes up means that especially defensive Zapdos can just blow through an entire team by itself. Um, yeah. So I guess I'll talk more about Starmie then, the other thing that you're trapping with Suittar. Well, it turns out Starmie is relatively easy to kind of waste its time and deal some toxic damage to it with your Skarmory. And if you do this, say it's toxic, it's at like, 80%, it's taking 10% or 20% from toxic. If you switch your Tar in on a Rapid Spin or on a Thunder Wave, then they're in a very difficult spot because they're at, 80% or whatever. But they're taking such a huge amount from toxic that they kind of need to switch out, but they can't switch out because you're trapping them. So often what they'll do is they'll stay in and they'll just take a huge amount of damage on their Starmie, putting them in range maybe in the future to get clocked by your Skarmory's Drill Peck or get clocked by another move from one of your teammates. Um, yeah, and if you can set this up, you're suddenly in a very good spot versus Def Me, which Def Me invalidates a lot of Spike's build. If you're Peck Tech Skarm, you're not going to be able to break Def Me. It's just going to enter every time um, you try to spike and take care of you, and it's a shame. So yeah, I see it as very good at trapping Def Me. You can dodge 2-hit KO even if you're willing to invest in special defense. So most Def Me will put 40 into special attack. This gives them a guaranteed two-shot on Suittar. But if you put a bit more into special defense, maybe you can dodge that two-shot and trap them even more consistently. You can also pair. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that you can pair Suittar with Gengar. And what does this do? Well, Def Me already hates Gengar. The idea that Def Me is going to um, consecutively 1v1 a Suittar and Gengar is kind of absurd. You can sack whichever one you want, getting some chip on it, and the other one can finish it off, force it out, keep the spikes up, etc., etc. Um, and Claydol, well, Claydol wants to Earthquake Suittar and Psychic Gengar. Well, Suittar's immune to Psychic, Gengar's immune to Earthquake, meaning if you pivot either one of these in on Claydol, you can get the other one in for basically free. And suddenly it becomes very, very difficult for these spinners to cover all the moves they need to cover when you have Suittar um, and Gengar both working in tandem to put pressure on them. So that's one application of Suittar, enforcing spikes for a spikes team. It can be even a win condition paired with Skarmory. That's not the only thing it can do, because you see, Suittar, especially if you're running it on a team without like choreographed Suittar teammates, if you're running it with like a Zapdos, a Flygon, a Skarmory rather than a Forretress, a Jirachi, it's a defensive Jirachi, but it's unrevealed. People cannot tell that it's a Suittar, as opposed to if you're running it with like Breloom Heracross. And if people can't tell it's a Suittar, they need to respect the possibility that it's a physical Tyranitar. And physical Tyranitar has a completely different set of counters than Suittar. So, for example, say you're in on a Zapdos. They think, okay, he's going to click Rock Slide, or maybe he's going to Dragon Dance up. I'm going to go to Metagross or Swampert and safely take the Rock move, or safely handle whatever he's handling. If you predict that and you click Fire or Grass, you're potentially doing a huge amount of damage to Metagross or Swampert. And you're freeing up, or even Crunch. You could do a lot of damage with Crunch too. You're freeing up your teammates to sweep through these things later. Something like an Agilogross or an Aerodactyl could be looking at a sweep with chip on Swampert or Metagross, or a fighting type, one of Tyranitar's other counters. I did this actually in ADVPL. I had an opponent. He brought in Blissey. I brought in Tyranitar. It was a Suittar, but it hadn't shown suit. It hadn't shown any moves. It actually didn't have any special moves. It was walled by the Blissey. I'm trying to say. But I figured because of his team comp, he had a Swampert in the back. So I clicked Grass. This Blissey switched to Swampert. Suddenly I did 80% to the Swampert. The Tar couldn't break the Blissey, but it didn't stop him from forcing it out because he didn't know that. Um, and with the Pert down, suddenly my Aerodactyl and my Flygon that I had in the back became a lot more dangerous. They became capable of putting real pressure on to his team and winning the game. Although I didn't win that game. But situations like these can be produced by having a Suittar that kind of disguises itself, maybe as a different Tyranitar set. You can also suit trap things that think they're going to have to take a big hit. The aforementioned Zapdos, as well as Celebi, trying to switch out of Hidden Power Bug, will switch out of Suittar. You can tag them with Pursuit as they do, deal about 50%, and potentially you're looking at opening up like a sweep for a teammate that you couldn't have gotten otherwise. Also, as you may know, a lot of people want to switch Skarmory into Tar. Not Earthquake, or not Rock Slide, hopefully. Ideally, it's Earthquake, or Baby Bug, or Double Edge. But if you're a Suittar, particularly a fast Suittar, you can tag it with your Fire move, and you can limit its spikes. You can limit it to 1 spike or even 0 spikes. I did this in my Mushi League match against Rudazi, where I ran a fast Suittar, it outsped his Skarm, and he switched out of my Tar thinking it was a physical Tar. So I tagged Skarm with Flamethrower as it entered. Now it's at 40%. I'm faster. I've limited him to 0 spikes, and that was a Superman team. I didn't have spin, so I was relying on Tyranitar and situations like this to limit his spikes. Yeah, so situations like this can be created with Suittar. You can treat it like a mixed Tar, where they'll go to their classic DD Tar or physical Tar counter, and you just surprise them and blast through them. Yeah, very powerful offensive application for Tar. Now let's talk a bit more about its defensive applications. So an issue you're going to run into on a lot of TSSs is that you want Blissey to be your like standalone special wall, because it kind of just does wall everything specially, and it walls a lot of mixed threats too, by the way. But there are archetypes, special offense archetypes, that are constructed around punishing Blissey very, very hard. So I'm talking Zapdug. If you don't know, Zapdug is like Baton Pass Zapdos, Beat Up Doug Trio. Beat Up 2 hit KOs Bliss, and you EV the Doug so it eats an Ice Beam, even after spikes maybe. And yeah, you have a move now on Zapdos that kills their Blissey. So this becomes suddenly very hard to switch into Zapdos. And with the Blissey dead, the rest of their team is freed up to maybe sweep. Um, Similarly, Gengar, it's another fast special attacker with lots of coverage moves. It would be blocked by Bliss, except it has moves like Taunt and Explosion and Will-O-Wisp to pressure Blissey and make it difficult for Blissey to handle Gengar's teammates after it's handled Gengar. Well, Suittar puts a stop to both of these issues. For the Gengar issue, obviously it's trapping Gengar, or killing Gengar with Crunch, Pursue, whatever you wanna do. It handles Gengar. Um, and then with Zapdug, you can lead with this Suittar. You can immediately put pressure on the Zapdos and shift this special offense team onto the defensive, um, which is a big, big positive for a team that doesn't want to be switching into the Zapdos immediately. Even if it's revealed, Suittar still can kill a chipped Zapdos. It still can switch into Zapdos. So it helps provide a lot of buffer in those matchups, special offense matchups, for teams that want Blissey as, their standalone physical wall. Um, It also, well, I'll talk now about Jirachi. So Jirachi, especially defensive Jirachi, I'm talking like Wish Protect, um, like Fire Punch Toxic maybe, with substantial specially defensive investment. It has unique traits as a special wall, because it can't be exploded on, and it also is an Aerodactyl counter in addition to being a special wall. But it has a very, very, very bad Gengar matchup, and uh, that basically invalidates it because your other special walls, your Blissey's, your Celebes, they're also kind of a status absorber, and that includes Will-O-Wisp. If you need to pivot, it's Will-O-Wisp. You can pivot it in, and if Will-O-Wisp misses, you're probably way ahead. If Will-O-Wisp hits, you're not that far behind. Um, so yeah. Otherwise, how are you going to switch into Will-O-Wisp? Well, obviously, Suittar switches into Will-O-Wisp. Doesn't really care about getting burned, and it kills Gengar from there. So you pair this with specially defensive Jirachi, and suddenly you've freed up this incredible wish passing, steel typed special wall that you can't really justify without Suittar, without support in some form. Um, Registeel, too, by the way. We're talking about specially defensive Jirachi. Registeel has the same issue with Gengar. Um, so you pair Suittar with Registeel, suddenly your Registeel gets a lot more consistent as a special wall. Another kind of side effect of Suittar, by the way, is that your standard Fire Blast, Grass, Focus Punch Charizard is trapped. If they don't have a sub up, your Suittar can just click Suit and do 50 to it as it exits. Um, and obviously, something like Jirachi or Registeel is going to get pressured a lot by Zard. And so having Suittar to wear it down or trade with it is extremely welcome. Yeah, you can also just kind of customize Suittar. As I said, you have two extra moves. You could put Roar on. I would say the standard is probably Roar Fire, or for me, I like to use Grass Fire. But you can put a massive, massive number of different moves on, depending on what you need Suittar to do defensively and offensively. You can run Earthquake for Jirachi. Roar and Fire Blast also kind of do it, but Earthquake does it the best. You can run counter for physical threats, and you can beat Lax with just Crunch. In one of my Gymvitational games, my opponent brought a Lax, and the Lax on paper, it was a rest Lax, 6-0'd my team. But I was constantly switching my Suittar into this Lax, and I was clicking Crunch. Well, eventually I got a drop. I was just forcing him to rest over and over again. Eventually I got the drop. I clicked Pursuit as he exited with the drop. Suddenly he has to rest again. And basically the whole mindset is I'm searching for crunch drops and I'm searching for crits so that I can put pressure on his lax. And eventually I did end up breaking it with a crit, you know. And it took me a lot of turns to fish for that. And there are turns that Suittar generated with its powerful crunch. Um, yeah, it's still a normal resist, so it still does fine against lax. I think we already talked about Charizard and how it limits Charizard. Limits Moltres too. Moltres will switch out. You click Pursuit as they're switching out, you can do a lot of damage to it. Um, you can also limit choice band users. Aerodactyl, if they lock into flying or double edge preemptively, hates to take a pursuit on the switch out. Alternately, if your Suittar is at full and they're locked into slide, you can catch them even if they're locked into slide because they don't know it's a Suittar necessarily, so they're going to switch out fearing your own rock slide, and then you can deal 50 with Suit. Doug, I think we all know the classic calc of Mach Punch from Loom, plus Pursuits from Tyranitar as the Doug is switching out, kills Doug, meaning if you have both a Breloom and a Suittar, they can trap Doug as if they were Porygon 2 with Mach and Pursuit. CB Ment, this is a big one. So if you're not a Stall Lord, you might not be familiar with how hard Choice Band Salamence is to switch into. There's basically no good switch-ins to Choice Band Salamence. There's a few. But if they can guess right, they can put a lot of pressure on your team. And if you're running a Stall team without a lot of Protect users, they're going to have a lot of chances to switch their Ments in and gamble your team away because, you know, the payoffs are very in their favor. They get it right, they kill a member. They get it wrong, they switch Ments out the next turn. Well, Suittar turns that all on its head because if they lock into flying, which is a move they definitely want to lock into, or even Rock Slide, you can suit them on the way out and you deal 50, and the sand is up, so you know it's choice banded, and it just puts you 2 steps ahead versus a choice band Salamence oriented team, which I really like and I find to be really strong. Yeah, so those are kind of some of its defensive applications. Now I'm going to talk about some spreads that I'm more fond of and some different tech options or moves you can run on this thing. I already mentioned counter. You can run even with bold and with a little bit of defensive investment. You don't necessarily need the special attack for a Suittar. Um, and you can suddenly find it dealing with a lot of offensive threats, your Metagrosses, your enemy Tars, your Salamences. A lot of stuff tends to crumble to counter, especially if they don't know it's coming. Snorlax, right? If you're using it as Snorlax counter makes it a lot better at that. So you eat an Earthquake and well, you know. You can run more special defense, handle Def Me. Also handle these super fat Gengars that people are running with Giga Drain. This thing is designed to beat Suittar. You kind of have to stay in and Suit. You can't just, or stay in and Crunch. You can't just fish with Suit versus this Gengar spread. Um, but you can, you know, special defense will also help you trap Def Me and potentially also help you in other ways, such as maybe it's now an off me answer, as crazy as that sounds, but it lives Hydro Pump. And then my personal favorite spread, which I'm mentioning because it's kind of specific. McMegan invented this spread. He released it in one of his team dumps. 40 HP and 84 special defense, mean that you eat Pert Hydro. Um, yeah, you eat Pert Hydro. I believe even in Torrent. No, you don't, not in Torrent. That's a different spread. And if you run Grass on this now turns into a situation where they switch into a Crunch. You're faster than their Pert, and you can immediately put pressure on with Grass, not fearing their Hydro, because you take it very confidently with these EVs. And it's 193 speeds. You outspeed Skarmory. You outspeed Claydol. I'm going to level with you about this spread. This spread and Grass coverage I use on like, I don't know, 50% of my Suittar teams that I seriously bring. I find that the extra offensive power that comes with being faster than things is extremely welcome. And I'm usually running this with Aerodactyl, meaning you can be very far ahead if you successfully grass a Pert. Um, yeah, and you'd run Flamethrower on here on this with this McMegan spread. Yeah, I love this spread. And you can run random moves in your last slots. I talked about Fire and Grass. I talked about Fire and Roar. But this thing has an incredible variety of moves. T-Wave, one I didn't mention, very dangerous. Focus Punch, with or without sub. This lets you really put a lot of pressure on Blissey. Brick Break does too, but Focus Punch really takes the cake. You can run Thunder. So if you don't know, if you're not a melodic aficionado, melodic switches very, very confidently into mixed and special Tyranitar. But with Thunder, you're two-shotting melodic. You're potentially getting a full para. You can put yourself very, very far ahead. Ice Beam, great for Flygon. If you think your opponent's going to bring Superman, um, they'll probably just automatically go to Flygon when they see a Tyranitar, and then you Ice Beam them and it's out of the way. Free up one of your teammates, maybe. It also helps with Salamence. But yeah, these are just some of the options you can run. But I've talked for long enough. Hope you got a good idea for what Suittar can do. You don't see it as like an offense one trick um, that handles Gengar anymore. And yeah, I hope I opened your eyes to some team building options, inspired you to build with this powerful, powerful Tyranitar set. So thanks for watching.